Hi, this is Corey Johnston, and today's lesson is going to come from Isaiah's 55th chapter. Now, if we read this chapter in isolation or apart from its context, there's a lot of general references and allusions which don't make sense unless it's connected to its wider context. So the first foundational fact we need to proceed from is that Isaiah was privy to the captivity of Judah a little less than 2 centuries in advance before its occurrence. He was the original prophet to be on the receiving end of this soon-to-be, eventually confirmed event as issued by the Almighty. And by Isaiah's time, Israel was on a slippery slope and had been for some time. And according to the covenant, there was consequences for apostasy and blessings for obedience. And the tragedy of Israel's history is that they had to succumb to the negative end of the promise, and this occurred in 586 BM, before Messiah, when Nebuchadnezzar, the king and Babylonian conqueror, razed the city and destroyed the temple. But Isaiah knew this in advance of its occurrence, and he was also privy to the fact of, in the 45th chapter, he knew Cyrus would come after him, and he would be a liberator more than a conqueror. But the opening verse reads, "O everyone who thirst, come to the waters, and you who have no silver, come buy and eat. Come buy wine and milk without silver and without price." The best things in life are free, and the things that money can buy are all well and good, but they're no substitute for the things that money can't buy. And he uses physical analogies of food and drink to connect it to the implicitly analogous spiritual element. Humanity consists of more than a physical nature. We have spiritual needs with appetites and capacities which need to be fed, much in the same manner we nourish and sustain our body through food. So too there are spiritual gifts and resources which satisfy the spiritual element in us. "Why do you weigh out silver for what is not bread, and your labor for what does not satisfy? Listen to me, and eat what is good, and let your being delight in self and fatness." So the irony of coveting and questing after the material items of the world is that we acquire them in the expectation that they will bring us lasting satisfaction, but everything in the earth is perishable, and so too is the satisfaction which it can produce. The things of the temporal world are temporary, but what he has to offer and what he's alluding to and promising is that which moth cannot corrupt nor rust stain. It's the imperishable treasures of salvation. And he strikes the imperative by twice repeating himself, listen and eat what is good. Now, what Yahweh wants for us is only and invariably best, and we are to delight in what he provides. His provision produces a response of satisfaction if appreciated for what it is, and that is something incumbent upon us. We are implicitly admonished to accept, embrace, and seek out the best gifts. "Incline your ear and come to me. Hear so that your being lives, and let me make an everlasting covenant with you, the trustworthy kindnesses of David." Once more, what he has to say is important, so he prefaces it with an injunction to listen, because if you take it at face value, he doesn't want it to go in one ear and out the other. He really wants you to absorb and reflect, and the consequence for so doing is life, an everlasting covenant. This is eternal, meaning without end in time, and that was the Davidic covenant was a promise outlined. We can read of it in 2 Samuel 7, in which Yahweh promised David an eternal dynasty, which was fulfilled through his biological progeny, Yahshua the Messiah. Yet his temporal dynasty, they ruled Judah to the bitter end in 586 BM, but then they were scattered. But the everlasting is a spiritual kingdom which far outlives the now extinct Judean dynasty and monarchy. "See, I have given him as a witness to the people, a leader and a commander for the people. See, a nation you do not know, you shall call, and a nation who does not know you runs to you because of Yahweh your Elohim and the Sacred One of Israel, for he has adorned you. So this nation is not referenced by name, but we know from inference that it was Babylon, who was the rising world power that had displaced Assyria during the geopolitical seesaw balance of power struggles around somewhat after the time when this was written. But Isaiah was privy to the fact in advance of its occurrence, being on the receiving end of divine revelation, and the purpose for which that he allowed his chosen and beloved people to be captured was to spiritually refine them and purify them through suffering and affliction and captivity, which they left to their own devices. They proved untrustworthy to honor their end of the covenant. So by the same covenant, they were to be scattered. And seek Yahweh while he is to be found. Call on him while he is near. Now, there are two major implications in this verse. One is that Yahweh is knowable. Two, that he wants to be known. So it's really incumbent upon us to extend the hand when his hand is already reaching down to us. And far better to utilize and take advantage of the opportunity while he is near, because he never truly forsakes us, but we can forsake him and deprive ourselves of his blessings and provisions. And he was near. Now, he was, I guess the Jews would have thought him as being nearer in their nation of Israel. This was a nation they had been selected to settle for a divine purpose, which was to be a blessing and a witness to the world. And in verse 4, we remember, as a witness to the people. This is a reference to Israel. They were to evangelize the world, but they had difficulty balancing the dichotomy of being a separate people from an evangelical people. The majority of them, the majority consensus, was to emphasize the separatist aspect at the expense of the evangelical. Let the wicked forsake his ways, and the unrighteous man his thoughts. Let him return to Yahweh, who has compassion on him, and to our Elohim, for he pardons much. Now, his pardon and forgiveness is magnificent, but there are some conditions we must meet, some prerequisites we must satisfy in order to lay claim and hold of that forgiveness. We have to forsake our wicked ways. This requires us to disobey ourselves, because our natural inclinations are at war and violently conflict with the divine purpose, potential, and promise which is in us. And the human heart is desperately wicked. We read of Jeremiah 17:9. So man is a naturally wicked creature with theoretically righteous potential, which can come not from anything we do in ourselves, but through an alien righteousness. This is getting a little far outside of the context, but Isaiah does make much mention of messianic prophecy, but it is through him that we become justified, which is the theological term for declared innocent at the judgment. And the unrighteous man, his thoughts. Now, ways are presumably distinct from thoughts in that they are actions, whereas thoughts are only take place in the mind, but all actions are in some sense rooted in thoughts. So it's really in Matthew's 5th chapter, the Savior raises the bar on the Mosaic law by replacing actions with attitudes, and saying that once you mentally forsake the law, all bets are off in every other aspect in practical reality. And return to Yahweh. Now, when we turn from our sin, we turn to the one who can justify and save us, and he will have compassion, but his compassion is not unconditional. We have to bear that in mind. He does love us unconditionally, but he forgives us on the condition of our repentance. For my thoughts are not your thoughts, neither are your ways my ways, declares Yahweh. There is a qualitative chasm between us and him being an omniscient or all-knowing being, whereas we are of finite cognitive capacities. So a lot of the ways of divinity do not immediately add up or make sense, but eventually they will, and we have to have faith that they will, and never question what he commands, because he often communicates to us in the form of the command, because the things that he commands us or wants us to do are difficult, and he doesn't endeavor to persuade us, and he doesn't owe us an explanation, but often he does provide a promise for the reward we can expect should we be faithful to our end of the agreement. For as the heavens are higher than the earth, so are my ways higher than your ways, and my thoughts than your thoughts. Again, this is the allusion to the qualitative chasm between an omniscient being and frail, finite creatures whose cognitive capacities are wholly inferior to his. And the distance is, it's actually somewhat of an understatement, but he uses a physical, relatable analogy of the heavens and the earth, the vastness of the universe, the virtually unending universe between the ways of the earth. And that is the distance which exists between us and him in what we can think and what we can do. For as the rain comes down and the snows from the heavens, and do not return there, but water the earth, and make it bring forth and bud, and give seed to the sower, and bread to the eater, so is my word that goes forth from my mouth. It does not return to me empty, but shall do what I please, and shall certainly accomplish what I sent it for. Every word he sends is for a purpose, and what he wills, he can wish into existence. He is an omnipotent or all-powerful being who is able to speak things into existence, and at the slightest whim of an intervention, he can miraculously intervene in the organic course of the actions and interchanges of human agency, which left to its own devices would be not a just society or outcome. But it's the same function. Now the rain and the snow and the elements that fall from the sky pertaining to weather have their source of origin in him, and every element in nature obeys that which commissions it to do its purpose. Man alone has the capacity for disobedience, and that is this tragedy of our human history, is our struggle to remain faithful or obedient to what we know yet do not do. And this is also the physical growth of crops are analogous to spiritual growth. We remember earlier in the discourse we mentioned the fact that humanity consists of more than a physical nature, but he often uses physical illustrations to present or make more relatable profound spiritual truths. For with joy you go out, and with peace you are brought in. The mountains and the hills break forth into singing before you, and all the trees of the field clap the hands. The good news or gospel is not a good news of despair, lest it would not be what it claims, which is good news, but it is a gospel of happiness and joy. This is the purpose. Now, that does not mean that life is to be a bag of roses. It's only to lay hold of the eternal perspective and put our momentary sufferings and slights that we endure while enduring to the end in perspective. Now, we can have joy in the midst of our trials. Paul was an exemplary apostle in this regard, and we don't let our circumstances control us, but when we submit to the one who controls circumstances, a lot of times we find ourselves at the mercy of external actions of which we maybe didn't provoke, but are the result of waywardness of others, and that really tests our faith and inclines us to look on him who can alleviate the cause and the effect of the suffering. Instead of the thorn, the cypress comes up, and instead of the nettle, the myrtle comes up, and it shall be to Yahweh for a name, for an everlasting sign which is not cut off. This is eternal in its implications. That means that it will last forever, and it is from an eternal being and for an eternal purpose. And the name of Yahweh was of central significance, so much so that it would form the basis of the third commandment in the Decalogue. And the everlasting sign is taking place presently at all times, but they all connect in the end to an eternal, all-knowing, and all-loving being. And that's all the time we have for today. Thank you so much. Tune in next time. Bye-bye.